Put my phone on flight mode.
Yeah, I would.
Oh, yeah, we're all good to go. All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining in. I'm really excited to have something a little bit different tonight. So I've got two authors joining us. I've got Josh Pomare and Anna Downs. For those who don't know, I'll give a quick introduction of Josh and Anna. So Josh, who writes as J.P. Pomare, is an award-winning writer who has work published in journals including Meanjing, Kill My Darlings, Takaki, and Mascara Literature Review. He has hosted the the On Writing podcast since 2015, featuring best-selling authors from around the globe. His first novel, Call Me Evie, was critically acclaimed and won the Nio Marsh Award for the best novel. In the Clearing, Pomare's second novel was also a critically acclaimed bestseller, while his third novel, Tell Me Lies, was a #1 audio bestseller. And his latest book is The Last Guest. So hopefully it's showing up there fine. And Anna. Oh, and sorry, I missed to say, he was born in New Zealand and resides in Melbourne. So Anna grew up in Sheffield, UK. She studied at Manchester before winning a place at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art and moving to London to pursue an acting career. That included credits in EastEnders, Casualty, Holby City and Dazzle and Pasco, as well as a long-running stage production of The Dresser in London's West End. Anna's best-selling debut novel was The Safe Place, and her latest novel is The Shadow House, which hopefully it will show my copy there. And Anna now lives on the Central Coast. So also really excited because both Josh and Anna are joining us for the second time. So glad to have you both back again. Just wondered, and I also want to mention as well, people watching, if you've got a question during the Facebook Live, please type it in comments and you'll have a chance to win a copy of either The Shadow House or The Last Guest, thanks to Hatchet and Firm Press. So thanks so much for joining us. Just wondering if you want to start off, one of you, to tell us about your new book.
I'll let Josh do that. You go.
Okay. I'm talking about my book, right? Not Anna's.
Well, it's up to you. You can.
So my book is it's called The Last Guess, and it's about more or less about surveillance capitalism and the ways we incorporate tech into our life, but I guess the elevator pitch is a young couple decides to rent out their holiday home, and they soon discover that one of the guests who stayed there has installed tiny little surveillance cameras around the house and has been watching. And yeah, I guess anything beyond that becomes a bit of a spoiler, but yeah, that's what it's about: Airbnb properties and surveillance cameras and family and a whole bunch of stuff.
I'm wondering as well, like I've read both of your books and really loved them both, but it really got me thinking, The Last Guest, like the popularity of Airbnb and all that, if how often something like that might happen. And had you heard about something like that happening?
It's really weird. You know, I was writing this, I guess I had the idea for this because we were Airbnb-ing our property out, and I had installed cameras. It started out, a really short version of the story. It started out, we would leave wine out for guests, and one day, the first time we had people stay, we came home and they'd drunk about a glass worth of wine. And I asked my wife, do you think we can drink the rest of the wine? And of course, we didn't. But it was just one of those things where, I thought, what's the worst that could happen? They were sophisticated types. They didn't drink out of the bottle. I was basically going through worst case scenario. This was pre-COVID, so it's unlikely that the wine was diseased. But we didn't drink it. But then I remember thinking, that's not the worst thing that could happen if they did something to the wine. They could have, burnt the house. There's all sorts of scenarios. And one of the scariest scenarios I thought of was what if they install cameras in the house? And that's sort of where the novel was born out of. And before it was published, people who had told this idea to, they began to send articles. And it's strange because I couldn't find much at first, but over the past sort of 3 years, there has been a real emergence in discoveries of cameras, and people are much more savvy to it now. They know how to search for cameras in Airbnb properties, but it's much more common than I was expecting, and also there's a much greater market for it. Sharing the material that these cameras yield. So, yeah, it's kind of a pretty scary world, I guess, we live in, but if we're careful and savvy, we can keep on top of these things.
Yeah. And Anna, do you want to tell us a little bit about the Shadow House? I've loved both of your books, and have to say I found the Shadow House a bit airier than The Safe Place.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a shift in tone. I mean, it still has the same kinds of, similar elements to The Safe Place, but it definitely goes a little bit darker. So there she is, for anyone who hasn't seen her. So the Shadow House is about a single mum called Alex who is escaping an abusive relationship, and she moves with her 7-month-old baby and her 14-year-old son to this eco village, which suits her needs perfectly because it's remote, it's far away. There's kind of safety in numbers. There's lots of neighbors and a community around her. And everything is wonderful at first. It's really idyllic. It's in the most gorgeous setting, and she feels very safe. But pretty soon, some very strange things start to happen to her. And she does a bit of digging, and she realizes that the same strange things happened to a woman who used to live on the land on which the eco village was built over. So the eco village was built on former farmland, and the farmers who lived there, these same strange things happened to them with these horrific, disastrous consequences. So the book is about Alex trying to find out what happened in the past in order to protect and save her children in the present. And thematically, it's about parenthood, it's about motherhood, it's about not necessarily being able to trust your own instincts and your own mind. It's about repetitive patterns of behavior. It's also a lot about fear of technology and parenting in in the age of tech, and which I think is really frightening. I mean, I'm not a complete technophobe, but I'm definitely pretty uneasy with it. And I think, like most millennials, we grew up without the internet and without a huge amount of technology in our lives, but yet we're expected to parent, guide and advise our children in this world and send them forth into this universe that we don't really understand, and we're all a little bit freaked out by. And there's a lot of demonization of young people that comes with that. A lot of assumptions are made about this new world because we're so frightened of it. So yeah, and I think that's good crossovers with Josh's book there, because we're both looking at technology and the ways in which it's utilized or not utilized. The myths, the realities therein. Yeah.
And
Was this,
sorry.
So was it? And just out of curiosity, with the Shadow House, the setting, because I'm fascinated by this. The setting, were you planning to try design a world away from technology where it kind of pervades it? I mean, was that your sort of, because it's sort of, like when you think of an eco village and the ideals around that, so much of it is kind of to escape the modern world.
Well, it is and it isn't. I think because we're such an individualistic society, I think that is the assumption by and large. Any kind of group of people who live closely together, we're all a bit suspicious of. What are they doing? It's a bit weird. Why would you live like that, kind of thing? I mean, that was my assumption as well, but they're not Luddite at all by any stretch. I mean, the eco villages that I've done research into, and the local one that I spent a lot of time at, they actually use a heap of technology. They're a community of work from homers, and you know, as the founder said to me repeatedly, they wouldn't survive if they didn't embrace technology. And they don't hate technology, they're not against technology. What they're trying to do is live sustainably. So they're kind of against anything that wastes energy, and that kind of, you know, that they want to promote living with a smaller eco footprint. They do have this. This is in the book. They have a scheme called collaborative living, whereby you buy kind of blocks of land with people and live sort of semi-communally with those people. So you might have two houses, two dwellings on the same land. And then you might also have a shared building together with all your kind of big ticket appliances and stuff in there, and maybe like a common room for the kids to play in or something. But, you know, fundamentally you live separately. But it's just a way of bringing prices down. And, you know, obviously they produce all their own food. They all use a slightly different method of decision making, but it's very kind of everyone has a voice, everyone is equal kind of thing. They're actually, the one that I spent time at was a really pleasant place to be, and definitely didn't get the sense that they were trying to live off grid in the kind of in the sense that you were talking about. Like they don't want to remove themselves from the modern world per se. They just want everybody to stop consuming so much stuff. They want to remove themselves from that.
Yeah, I was just thinking of like Pete Evans for some reason, because I know he's like,
Yeah.
and I think he's pretty crazy, but
Yeah.
but also that's an ideal that lots of people sort of subscribe to, you know, like escaping the rat race and living off the land and stuff like that. And I always thought an extension of that would be no technology. But then there's all like, the other cool thing about the book and the setting is like there's this kind of mythical element to it as well. You know, like that. I watched that movie Midsummer, which is like pretty terrifying.
I love that movie.
But it's got that kind of atmosphere, you know. Like while I was reading, I was just like, I could just imagine it going in that direction, you know. Like it's. I love things that.
And who's to say it doesn't, Josh?
Yeah, exactly. You know, but just that kind of flirting with supernatural elements, and you know, some authors can do it really well and get away with it, and it's just like in this book there's I don't think it's a spoiler, there's like a, you know, there's a witch, or is there, and like I said, it's a real tying of this kind of really modern concept of, yeah, I say modern, you know, communes have been around for a while, but this modern concept, like this kind of eco-tech village kind of, you know, but also the myth of the witch in the woods and how that ties in as well.
Yeah. And funnily enough, that kind of all came out quite organically. With The Safe Place, I planned the crap out of it, and so by the time, and also because it's, you know, when it's your first novel, you spend so many years thinking about it, don't you? You kind of, you know, before you even dare put any words down on paper, you've kind of got this thing rolling around in your head, and by the time you do sit down to write it, you've usually got a pretty good idea of what you want to do with it. With this one, my second novel, I mean, largely due to the deadline, it was just go, get those ideas down, write. And so the whole the witch element it sprang very organically out of something else, and out of characters' wants and needs. And I love any story. I'm obsessed with horror films and horror books, but I love when something has a kind of slightly ambiguous supernatural or paranormal element, especially when you're left with questions as to whether or not it's real. I love that. I love movies and stories like Midsummer as well, where the horror is very kind of explicit and real, but that unknown element and stuff that's left to your imagination. Things that could be. Could it be? Maybe
it feels very plausible. Midsummer feels like the reason it's terrifying is because it seems so plausible. But there is that kind of, I mean, it stretches, you know.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm thinking of a couple of particular scenes that don't seem that plausible. But yeah, I think more like Ari Aster's first movie, the Hereditary. That's
Which is also really good.
so good. I've got to say, like, I could watch that film over and over again, which maybe says something quite alarming about me. But I think that that film is so perfect in terms of the suggestion. And obviously it wraps up in the end in a very particular, very explicit way. Again,
I think it kind of answers the question of whether or not it's supernatural.
Yeah, that one does. Oh, yes.
10 minutes of the film.
Yes, very much so. But yeah.
Like, do you find with stuff like that? I do anyway. Like, I always go to films for plot more than prose, of course. But I often go to films and just find they can kind of unlock something, and films like that in particular, you're not, the first time you watch them, you're not watching them as for me anyway, I'm not watching them going, cool, oh, how does this tie into the plot mechanics? I'm fully involved, completely absorbed in the story. But then I rewatched Hereditary, because I watched it the movies and I had to keep looking away, and this odd thing happened that the bulb blew. This is a true story. The bulb blew in the projector with about 10 minutes to go, and no one in the theater knew if it was supposed to be like that. So the screen was black and you could hear like everything. And if you've seen that film and you know,
oh my God, that's horrendous.
Yeah, and it was just this wrenching experience where we kind of got to the end and then the sound was still going, but the lights came on and we're like, this is like mind-bending, and there's no credits. So we're like, well, clearly we're all idiots. And anyway, long story short is I rewatched it at home, a while later. But when I was rewatching it, I was looking at the kind of plot mechanics and stuff like that. And I find rewatching good thrillers and good horror movies like so inspiring, just for mining them for points of tension and raw material. But like I said, this has a real cinematic feel as well, I found. And same with The Safe Place, actually.
Oh, thank you.
To the same sort of extent, particularly the setting's really beautiful as well. But are you sort of like that as well? Like, do you find you
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, particularly with, thrillers and horrors, it's like, once you've watched it once, you've experienced it, you've kind of come to the end and you have an understanding about what the whole is, to then go back and rewatch how they do it and what information is important. When do they give you that information? How do they give it you? Like, it's almost always in these very small, very clever ways that, the subtlety of that level of storytelling and the efficiency of it as well is something that I always try and take notes of, so that when I'm writing a scene, I almost try and see it like a movie scene in terms of what do I want the audience to see in this scene, or what do I want them to not see? What is the camera going to be allowed to notice, and what's going to happen just slightly on the peripherals, or what do I want them to look at? Like, for example, you've got something in your book, the twist on which it's based, or the thing that's happening. You obviously don't want your readers or your camera to be looking at that thing. So what do you want them to be looking at, and how does that inform the other? And I love looking at the mechanics of that. Did you see oh my God, Mayor of Easttown? Did you watch that?
Yeah, same sort of thing. Yeah.
Oh, that was so clever.
Storytelling, like it's...
Yeah. Yeah. You're like, oh, well, we are not worthy. Yeah. But
I could see either of your books though on the screen. Have you had any approaches for options or?
Yeah, I have sold. Yeah, it's funny because you sell the option and then you wait.
Yeah.
But we get progress updates. I think for me, the last guest has sold the option, and Tell Me Lies and In Clearing, Evie have all been optioned. But In the Clearing, I think, is making really, really strong progress. So hopefully we have news about that. But it's such a different world though, because I just, like I say, this is my agent, and it might be the same with you, and we just like, I write books, and if you want to pay me to do something with it afterwards, you can. That's my sort of attitude. And I know people can be quite precious about adaptations, and maybe, you know, if my work got it adapted and it was horrible, I would change my opinion. But I just, whenever I get updates, I'm like, they're like, oh, this person's attached or whatever, you know, or we got someone writing it or whatever. And it's, my response was, oh, cool. What does this mean in terms of progress? You know, like, so yeah, I'm glad you say that. And I think this, I definitely can see the Shadow House.
Yeah.
I can see the cinematic potential in that. But same with the Safe Place. Like I said, a very cinematic and quite beautiful, scenic books.
Thank you. Yeah, so the option for the Safe Place has been sold, so that's exciting. But it's very similar process. It's just the process is really long and kind of confusing, I think, for writers. We just have no idea what they're doing. But the Shadow House, we had a conversation with the people who are handling the rights just the other day, and that was really exciting. So, you know, fingers crossed. But yeah, I mean, I can't wait to see what people do. I'm so excited that In the Clearing is progressing, but I can't wait to see what somebody does with The Last Guest, because that is just that. I have to say, Josh, I think your openings are always so strong. Like, I remember reading Evie for the first time, and like that opening is one that I always say to people. I'm like, if you want an example of how to open your book, like, or particularly how to open a thriller, that's the one that you look at, because there's always so much movement in your openings. But with The Last Guests, I mean, I could see that. Like, I was almost like, I'll option it. I know how that needs to be made. Like, I want to produce and direct that. It's very, very clear and extremely exciting. And I love the way that you, you know, the details of that opening chapter of installing, you know, what he does to install those things. Is just like, you can almost see it frame by frame with the credits running to open up this incredibly exciting story.
Thank you. And that's really kind. I think with Evie, when I reflect on it, you always have that kind of, you look back at your debut and you're always like, oh, what I would have done differently if I were to write it now. And there's certain things I would have definitely done differently, but
really, can you say what they are? Because I loved that book. I thought it was perfect.
I just think, yeah, I mean, I won't change it, but there's certain parts I would probably tighten, and there's other parts I'd probably tease out slightly more. And I mean, I think, I definitely think the beginning I wouldn't touch at all.
Oh, I loved it.
And you know, the same with The Last Guest. Like, I really liked. I think it's because my process is I write until I get sick of it, and then and that doesn't mean I've finished the book, and then I go back to the start and start writing again. So the start gets rewritten like 30 times, and the end gets rewritten like 5 times, and that's why I probably think the starts I tend to be stronger, I think, for me.
Well, but you also do put, like I said, that real movement in. It's really, really visual. Do you do that deliberately? Do you kind of go, right, what can I see? Or
yeah, I think for me, and it's the same with films, but definitely in fiction, I find you can't afford to set a scene. You can do that a bit later, but when you say there's movement, like, everything kind of has to be moving. I can't really describe anything unless it interacts with the kind of narrative action. And the other thing is, where you start the story, you know, that's the other thing, is I always want to start the story at the most interesting bit, really, you know, one of the most interesting bits. And so Tell Me Lies starts when a woman pushes a man in front of a train, and The Clearing starts when a girl's kidnapped, and Call Me Evie starts, you know, when a young girl's having her head shaved, and then of course The Last Guest starts when someone's installing cameras in Airbnb. So it's sort of right at the heart of the action, and then I think if I do it well enough, my theory is I've bought enough time to introduce characters, and so, you know, start doing some of the boring stuff. But just on film, you know, The Last Guest is the book that probably had the most interest from film and stuff. And I think that's because of, that opening scene is, I did want to make it really easy to imagine. There's no dialogue, there's no interiority, like you don't see his thoughts. There's no other characters. It's just a man doing a bunch. Well, there is, when he goes to get the keys kind of stuff, there's some small interactions, but really it's just one man getting the job done, like he's just focused and fixed. And I think that's a lot of intrigue as well, that creates a lot of intrigue. But it is really interesting. And I was thinking, because this is set in Australia, I was thinking Alex, I don't know if she has it in her these days, but Nicole Kidman.
Oh God, don't! Wouldn't that be amazing? Oh yeah.
I feel like she does do, like she did Lion, like she does do Australian films.
Yeah, I mean, I think the good thing about Alex is she could be any age really, or there's not a lot about her that's prescribed. The important things about her are that she's not entirely at home in Australia. In the book, she's born in England like I am, but she doesn't have to be British Australian at all. Like she could be any kind of person at all. The main point is that she is not entirely comfortable. She's not entirely at home. She's very independent and very, very vulnerable as well at the same time. So she could be any age. She's got this teenage son and this baby as well. Her backstory is that she had this her son when she was very young, but yeah, it could be anything. I think that the fun thing about when you're tossing around ideas for screen adaptations is that I feel like passing it over to somebody else or potentially passing it over to somebody else, it kind of brings to the surface or brings to mind all this untapped potential in your story that because you're kind of, you're writing within this novel framework, you didn't get to explore, particularly if you've got a big cast of characters. I don't know if either of you saw Nine Perfect Strangers or read the book.
Yeah, I read the book.
Well, that's a perfect example of what I'm talking about, because the TV series is actually quite different to the book, but I think it worked brilliantly because it tapped into something that Leanne Moriarty hadn't quite done with the book. And don't get me wrong, I love the book, actually. I really, really liked it. But something that they've done and that they've run with is somehow, I think, even better. And I think that is really exciting, that you within your story that you've written, there are all these tangents and possibilities and kind of resonances that other brains will be able to tease out. So I think that's pretty cool.
The other thing with like your and I haven't really done this to the same extent, but I think all authors do. You inject personal anecdotes into your books a little bit, right? So like the same place, like you worked in a similar kind of house, and this is about a woman who's left the UK, and the similarities probably stop there. But is this? I find this happens so much more with female authors than male authors, where readers and audiences will be like, "Oh, that happened to this writer. Oh, it must be her." And I know Sarah Bailey talks about it a lot, but I know there's lots of authors who say, "Well, I'm not this character. Please, please stop asking about things that happened in this fictional work. They didn't have it." But I wonder, how do you feel about that? Like, I think everyone does it, but it seems to come up more,
Yeah, I think that's it's a really good question, because both things are true. It is true that none of the characters that we write are us, but it is also true that they are all us. In The Safe Place, I have a young woman, a slightly older woman, and a sort of middle-aged man. And actually, it's not middle-aged. It's about 40. That's not middle-aged, is it?
It's very sexy to be middle-aged, like he's
is.
like it's kind of James Bond.
Yeah, he's a bit sexy, isn't he, Scott? But Yeah, but each one of those characters are tapping into something that is very true of me. Equally, they are not me at all, because the story as it evolved did not allow for me in it. Do you know what I mean? So I think we all use something of ourselves as a jumping off point. But once you get into that story process, it becomes impossible for you to shoe in things of yourself because they no longer fit in that story. And the more you edit, the tighter that structure becomes until all your own stuff is squeezed out. You might end up, so in the Shadow House, there's a moment where Alex comes home and she notices that there's something not quite right about her house, and things seem to be slightly out of place, like somebody's maybe been in there, like the furniture that seems to be moved, the fridge magnets are a little bit off, but she can't quite put her finger on what it is. And she says it's a bit like once when I picked my kid up, or dropped my kid off at daycare, and I was so kind of sleep deprived and flustered, I got into someone else's car, and that there was a handbag on the seat in the same spot that I put mine, but it wasn't my handbag. There was a lip gloss in the cup holder that's where I put my lip gloss, but it wasn't my brand. And that actually happened to me. So
I can imagine that. I can see you doing that, Anna.
Yeah, it's a very me thing to do, and it fully happened. And the woman whose car it was, thankfully, was a friend. She was standing about 5 meters away from me, looking at me like this as I kind of, stumbled. I was so, really in those kind of early child years, kind of stumbled into this car, flung the door open, got in, and tried to jam my key into her ignition.
Why is the car not starting? What's going on?
She was watching me as I sat there going, oh my God. Like, going, what? Like, this is horrible. What's going on? I've slipped into a parallel dimension. But so there are some times, like in your book, where that you have a personal anecdote that will illuminate a particular moment or give color to a particular scene. It will give you, authenticity. And maybe, I don't know, like, you say you find it more often with female writers. I don't know if that's necessarily true. For me personally, it's because I'm just a chronic oversharer. There's basically no filter between what happens up here and what comes out of this. So, when I'm writing, I love to see what I can put in of myself, so I can, bring some real authenticity to those scenes. But like I said, there does get to a point, particularly, fourth draft, fifth draft, you're tightening your, there really is no room at that stage for anything that doesn't belong to the story. And by that point, the story is so of itself, and everything should be relevant to the story and to what happens. Everything should, be very, very specifically moving the story along. So yeah, where you started from gets inched out, I think.
It's also, I find, like with characters, it's the deeper as you deepen your imagining, the more you understand the characters. And I think if I'm being intellectually lazy and I am not fully engaging my imagination when I'm writing, I'm usually just asking, what would I do in this situation? And then that's when the characters become more like you. But then if you really deepen your imagination and you inhabit this character and you experience the world through their eyes and change your worldview to theirs, then all of a sudden, that's when I think you notice that your characters are changing and so much you.
But there's also that the story demands that from them. So, for example, if you're writing a story about a bank robbery and, you have to have a plot device where the robbery goes wrong. All right, what could you do? You could have, somebody drops their gun and it goes off and it shoots a passerby in the foot. Why would that person drop their gun? Are they twitchy? Are they nervous? Why are they nervous? Okay, let's find a reason why they might be nervous. What happened to them when they were younger? Do they have a tic? Do they have, why? Are they injured? And then you go back and you go back and you go back until you get to a point at which you're like, well, everything about this person is necessary to the plot and necessary to whatever this person does within the framework of the novel. And that's what I mean about it getting squeezed out. And that is totally, imagining, but it's also just drilling down and finding plausible possibilities and backups. Like, you with a novel, with a story, you want to make a point. So, or you want to leave your reader with something. So each one of your characters is almost like that's your supporting evidence. And you have to go into real detail because each one of your characters is kind of playing a note within the song of your story. Do you know what I mean? And to get that note right, you gotta go back and back and back and back to find out why does that one thing happen?
Yeah, who are they?
Yeah.
Something that you said struck me was, when you're talking about the scene in the house where you notice everything is the same but a little bit different, and it's got like that kind of Twilight, Twilight Zone sort of feel where you just like your skin's itching because someone's been in your house. And it's funny because when I was writing The Last Guest, there's a really similar scene, but they arrive and guests have stayed, but the house is spotless. And I find in fiction, and this probably harks back to like we were talking about film earlier, but I find that's the most unsettling, disconcerting element for me when I'm reading fiction is the tension that comes with disruption to routine or normalcy, and so like when I read great horror books or I read books that are clearly, for lack of a better word, tropey kind of thrillers with jump scares and things, I enjoy them in the same way. Like, I do enjoy them, but I find the ones that really unsettle me do what yours does, and that's it does have the kind of horror element to it, but the scariest parts are just noticing little things, little changes.
Yeah, and again, that's the visual thing, I think, as well. That's being really specific about detail, and I think the other thing that if we're talking about things that unsettle us, I think character and this notion of the unlikable character or characters that make questionable choices, whereby you as the reader, you wouldn't do that, and so you're kind of out of control, aren't you? The characters are doing things that you would never do. You're kind of, don't go in the basement, but with I think with The Last Guests, you've got some characters that make some pretty questionable
people cannot stand my characters in all of my books, really.
No, not in all of them, but you are very good at creating that kind of nuance.
I haven't written like a likable, we always talk about the challenge of making readers care about unlikable characters. Like that, I relish that challenge. I think if you can make someone care about someone who's fundamentally unlikable, that's the humanity, that's the empathy, and I quite enjoy that challenge. But what I'm working on now, like I'm just writing the most likable one of the characters I'm in love with. I'm like, this guy's the best, and I'm just writing like the best, most likable, most sympathetic character I possibly can.
And is that because you've had pushback? Is that because you've gone right? I need
annoying characters. No, it's just because he's not a suspect. He's a reliable narrator. Like I think part of it is I write pretty unreliable, sketchy kind of people. And he doesn't need to be in this story. He needs to be the one who's reliable. He needs to be the one because he's sort of investigating. And but it's funny, when you talk about unlikable characters, I think it's a surefire way to divide readers as well. Like readers will often say to me, "Oh, I really liked the book, but I just hated her, or I hated him."
Yeah. But I think that's for me, that's a measure that you've done a good job, because you've created a character that makes somebody feel something, and that people are not perfect. People, on the whole, create sort of divisive reactions. And so, yeah, if you write a character that somebody really has a kind of a strong reaction to, or just says, I wouldn't have done that, I'd have done something else, then you've done your job. You've created something in their head. You've created a little discussion. And yeah, that's what you want, I think.
You've
think
both
with the
got
last
though.
year-
Sorry, you
Are we
both got.
doing questions?
You've both got. No, that's all right. I was just going to say you've both got wonderful characters, but also you've got great settings as well. Like Lake Tarawera. I could imagine being. I have visited there myself, and I could imagine being there reading your book.
Yeah, I mean, I find the challenging thing at the moment, because I'm writing something set in the States, and that's sort of out of necessity for the story, and I wish it wasn't, because I can't go over there, and I think we will before it's published, but you know, the later we get in the piece, the more it hurts not being able to visit the place. And I think for me, setting in the past has always come first, but in this story, it hasn't. The setting is contingent on the plot, as opposed to the other way around, where the setting comes first and then I start to kind of tease out what can happen here. And so, yeah, I do find so much energy in writing about places.
Was Lake Tarawera somewhere that you're quite familiar with?
Yeah. So I grew up. It's just outside of Rotorua, which is my hometown, and had friends that lived out there, and would visit all the time. And it was just one of those places where I'm glad you've been, Jackie, because lots of people just miss it. You know, there's so much to see in New Zealand, and it's like that thing in the UK, ABC, or even Europe. You know, another bloody church. And it's like that in New Zealand, you know, another bloody lake or another bloody mountain. And I think you can really take it for granted. I think you can. They're all different, all beautiful in their own ways. The lakes area, but it's just so flat and peaceful and serene.
Have you found that? Because I myself am from New Zealand as well, and probably when you're living there, you don't appreciate it. But then when you're living somewhere else and then go back again, I find I appreciate it a lot more.
Yeah, you said I've never been away from New Zealand more than probably 2 years would be the longest I've been away.
Yeah,
really.
same. Yeah.
And those times I go back after a couple of years, it's just like I just feel so lucky that I grew up there. And I mean, it would be very much the same with Australia, but everywhere is a small town in New Zealand. You know, like the whole country is just one big small town. And you know, whenever I go back, I see it with the eyes that tourists would see it for the first time, and I really relish it. And if I stay there for a month or a few weeks, then I become complacent and appreciating it again. But yeah, I do find I write New Zealand. I enjoy writing New Zealand, and so I incorporate more of the setting probably into the story than I do in my other stories, for sure.
I wonder if there's some element of nostalgia though in that, because I think, you know, for me, one of the big draws of writing The Safe Place was this opportunity to relive an experience that I had that was absolutely amazing. And I don't know, a lot of my ideas start with places or feelings that are nostalgic. So, I mean, maybe it's that. Maybe you had such a wonderful upbringing that you just want to kind of swim in that feeling of nostalgia.
I don't know if you find this, Anna, writing real places, and when you're writing them, you know, nostalgically or from a time when you were there. So with Makatu for Call Me Evie, you know, this is another thing, like because I consulted for the guys trying to develop the film, and I was in the writing room and they were asking me questions about it. And someone who had recently visited the area to take photos and do research was like, yeah, but Josh, it's not like that anymore. And I was like, what do you mean? It's like, yeah, but she's like, yeah, because you wrote it from your experience of when you're in high school, you know, 2005 or whatever, 2006. But, you know, and then you set it in about 2016, 2017, which is 10 years later, and it had changed a lot by then. But by now, that whole area is gentrified. And she's like, so she's like, it's hard when we're writing for a contemporary audience, the setting. So they might even change it from Makatu and fictionalize it to, there's lots of coastal towns further around. But it's just this thing where, and no one ever said to me, oh, that didn't feel like Makatu or anything like that. but when you are writing nostalgically like that, even when I was revisiting it to think, nothing's stronger than my sense of place from those, early times that I went there. And it's the same with Tarawera. I went out there a few times researching this book, and still my strongest memories were going out there to parties as like a 16-year-old and skinny dipping in the lake and jumping from trees into the water and stuff. And that sort of really overpowered my recent research trip, where I was sort of taking notes and trying to really consume the place so I could regurgitate onto the page in a way. Nothing could really combat those early memories, I find, so fortunately no one said Lake Tarawera is nothing like that now, because it was gentrified, 30 years ago. It's always been a pretty nice kind of place, I suppose, affluent place.
And I can't remember who said something about that they write it first and then they go to the place that to kind of fact check and whereas I sort of almost for both my books I've needed to go somewhere first, because the place is so it informs the story and what happens and the flavor of the narrative so much, and also the place itself informs the meat of the middle, in as much as there are so many possibilities in terms of locations. Oh, that's very cool, something could happen there, what could happen there, or you could have this, oh, somebody could hide there, oh, here's an interesting little quirk about this landscape or this thing. So yeah, I kind of think that setting, my stories have began with setting in both of mine, but I wonder how I'm going to fare, if I don't get to travel very much.
And you said, Josh, you're writing something
just
about the US. Sorry.
Yes. What's that, Jackie?
Sorry, you said, Josh, that you're writing something at the moment about the US. So talking about what you said, is it somewhere you haven't been before?
Yeah, so it's not, I've spent a lot of time in not a lot actually, maybe a couple of months in the sort of northeast, but that's almost always been in around just New York City. So it's not in the city. So it's very close to where it's set, but I can't quite capture the atmosphere in a way I'd like. And then so what you do is you kind of catch the essence of, that kind of northeastern life, US life, via the proxy of films and television and books and stuff, but it's never quite the same. It's that thing, a million books are written about New York every year, and probably half as many are published, really, like loads and loads of books are published set in the US, and yet every book that's set in New York, and then every book that's set in New York is a different perspective of New York, and they all sort of have to be authentic to get away with it. So even consuming that much culture out of one place, I feel like you still couldn't write it authentically without at least seeing and spending a bit of time there. And so, so I don't know. We're having conversations about it now. I think it's working, but I definitely think it could be a lot stronger. And it's just a backdrop at the moment. And I don't like that. I like the way stories interact with settings, and I like the way that a story can only happen in that setting, whereas I could have a story and I could drop it anywhere in the States, really. Probably not so much outside of the US, but definitely, in lots of towns in the States.
And why did you choose to set it in the States? Is a story specific to the States?
Yeah, I mean, it's changed enough that the more it changes, the more I can try somewhere else. But it's sort of centered around college life in the States and the anonymity of academic life, shifting between colleges, and also there was a real kind of medical, like in Australia, it's like I couldn't convince someone in Australia that there's the drug that's cheap that could save your life, but if you don't have money, you'll die, because Australia's got pretty good healthcare, and so stuff like that, like there was the medical thread, and it was much more prevalent, but it's still there, and it's still quite important. So, and everyone's got a gun, so that's great for a thriller writer. It's like in Australia, it's like where the hell did these people get guns? Whenever I read a book set here and there's everyone's pulling out handguns and stuff, I'm like, Yeah, what's going on? You can maybe get a shotgun or a hunting rifle, you know, but how's like someone going to pull that out of a purse? So yeah, so it's also that the availability of handguns, and also just the way police and everything kind of has to work in a certain way. But we'll see what the publishers say. I think they all want it to be set there. That's the other
That's
problem.
fun. I would love to set one in the US. I spent I did an exchange when I was at university, and I went to the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign in the middle of the cornfields, and went to American college there. I had a frat boyfriend. I went to Keggies.
I need to.
It was so cool. I loved it.
You need to get your journal or diary from those days and just send it to me. I'll pretend I'll block it out after, but I need your insights. I think.
Oh, I could give you so many cool stories. It was the best time, but it was all very specific to kind of the year 2000 as well. So
okay,
yeah, like it would be really different.
Phones. I feel like if one of my characters just busted out like a Nokia 380 or whatever. I don't know. I didn't
even have a phone. The only phone that I had was like my dorm room phone, and my roomie would have to leave me messages. And when I went out there, I had a friend called Graham, and he was in Manchester, and I was in obviously in the States. And whenever he would call, my roommate would mishear, and she would write me messages saying "the Gram called," like thinking that was his nickname, because he would say it's Graham. Because he was English, you know, it's Graham. And she would go, Graham? The Graham? And then she would write the Gram called. So for months, I was like, this dude called the Gram. Like, is that a mafia boss? Or like, what's going on? Who wants to speak to me called the Gram? That's so funny. Yeah, good times.
Jackie, do we need to take any questions from...
I've got a few questions, if you want to have some questions. We've got a few people who are interested to know what sort of books you've been reading yourselves lately, and if there are anything you want to recommend to us.
Good. Yeah. I've been reading loads. I think everyone should read a book called Love and Virtue by Diana Reid. It's a debut. It would be close to my book of the year, I think, so far.
Okay.
Wow.
This is also close, I should say.
I was gonna say, my God, rude.
I mean, in terms of, I demarcate between literary and crime. So I've got like crime books I love, and I've got them by my bed because, you know, they're not. I don't have to carry the heft of these ideas while I'm reading, because I'm usually dozing off, and I read crime voraciously. Where literary fiction, I feel like it's like I'm eating my greens, I'm eating my salad. And this one was one of those books that felt so intellectually nourishing, but I got through it in like 2 days and just loved it. It's so well written. I'm also reading Jennifer Downes' new book. It's called Bodies of Light, which is also really great, but extremely painful as well. It's a real sad book. It's a big sad book, but I'm loving it. It's also, you know, extremely well written, and I haven't read that much crime lately. I read the Christian White one, which is coming out soon, I think.
I was going to say Christians.
It's really good. But what other crime? I really haven't been reading that much crime lately, to be honest with you. But yeah, those would be my recommendations.
Well, I've been elbow deep in kind of crime thriller horrors. So I've loved The Last House on Needless Street. If you are a thriller fan, if you really want to be excited, that's the book that you want to get. So the endorsement on the front is Stephen King, who says, I haven't been this excited since Gone Girl. And I know Gone Girl is so boring now. Like, stop comparing every book to Gone Girl. We're over it. But what he means is not every book is the next Gone Girl, and sometimes the story is completely different. In fact, Needless Street is nothing like Gone Girl whatsoever. But the execution and the twist is so exciting. When I read Gone Girl, it was like, oh, because it hadn't been done before. And this one with Needless Street is similarly jaw-dropping because it hasn't been done before. It's very, very good. And beautifully written as well. Similarly, Girl A by Abigail Dean is really well written. So harrowing, but beautifully done. I feel like that was really marketed as well, because it's not a thriller at all, but it is incredibly powerful. I've recently discovered an American writer called Grady Hendrix, and I've just become obsessed with his work. There's his recent one, the Final Girls Support Group. So he wrote the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, and I thought that was really, really excellent in lots of different ways. And then I just did his audiobook, My Best Friend's Exorcism, and then I've just moved on to this. Just such a clever, funny, brilliant writer that subverts the genre. He's an expert in his genre, and he's kind of exposing it and subverting it, as well as just reveling in it and loving it. It's a really joyful kind of read, all of his books, if you like horror. And one more is Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby is a fantastic one. Really, really brilliant. And also Laura Elizabeth Willett's novel that I still can't stop thinking about, The Newcomer. I've been recommending that to everybody. Again, really harrowing, really quite confronting in lots of ways, but one of those books that just sticks with you. Is so gorgeously written. She's just the most amazing writer. And so that would be mine.
Yeah, thanks for those recommendations. I do have one question for you, Anna, that I think is a really good question from Safi. She wonders how the people in the Life Eco Village felt about you writing a book about them. Well, not about them, but about the...
Yeah, it's really important to say that it's not about them. It's not based on that village, not at all. But they were gorgeous. They were really supportive. I was invited by the founder to come and have tea at her house, and we sat on her balcony overlooking the valley and had a huge chat. And she's been brilliant. Whenever I've had a question, I've just been able to ring her up, and she let us film the book trailer over there as well. So they've been amazing. Yeah. I'm not aware that any of them have read it thus far. So I don't know. Maybe they have read it and they're like cross with me or something. No, they wouldn't be. They wouldn't be, because it's not about them. And actually, there's a hell of a lot of positives. It is a scary, eerie, spooky book, and the setting does have a lot to do with that. But ultimately, I think there's a lot of things about that eco-village and others that are shown in a really, really positive light. So I really hope that they like it and they see it as a tribute in a manner of speaking.
Yeah. And I've had a lot of people suggest that you two should maybe write a book together.
Well, I would love that.
It's like half the work. I would be happy to do that.
Let's do it. Let's get it done. I would be really curious. Do you know what? Because I'm quite good friends with Candice Fox now, and so the way when we talk about when she and I have to call him James Patterson. She always refers to him as Jim, and I'm like, I once tried to refer to him as Jim, and it just felt really icky. So James, she writes with James Patterson, and the way that she talks about their collaboration really makes me want to try it. I think it sounds really, really interesting. That kind of exchange of ideas and like that party game where you write a line each and see what comes out. I would love that, like kind of tossing ideas around with somebody, bouncing off one another, and then passing the story back and forth to say, what do you think should happen now? What are we going to do now? I would love that.
Feels that almost that sort of collaborative writing feels almost like a different medium. I mean, the end result for the reader is the same, so medium's not the right word, but it's a different kind of, I don't know, intellectual kind of, it's almost dialogue. and I think that's fun, and I quite like the idea of that. It's also, I'm so lazy that I'm like, that's amazing. Let's do that.
Let's do that. 50% of the work.
And you're right, sort of, you know, I find that writing fatigue wouldn't exist with that, because, you know, you're sort of so, like, when you've run out of ideas, you read what the other person's come up with, or you talk about it, and then all of a sudden you're re-energized. So I find that writing fatigue wouldn't exist as well. But
I think you're probably right. I mean, I love that collaborative element of, you know, when you're tossing ideas around with your editor. And I think I had a bit of a stressful time writing The Shadow House. Certainly to begin with, I wrote a whole draft that just did not work because I was so determined to keep it under wraps for myself. You know, constantly had that Stephen King quote in my head, you know, write your first draft with the door closed. And I had that door really firmly closed, and it was just a disaster because it was just me. And I forgot that with The Safe Place, I had loads of kind of collaboration and input. You know, every step of the way, I was kind of checking in with people and pitching the idea and what do you think of this? And I did courses, and I don't know why I thought I could do this whole first draft by myself. And so, yeah, that collaborative thing where your ideas get jogged loose by someone else's energy, even if that thing is someone else saying, I think that a bomb should go off in this scene, and you go, no, but what should happen is this. It's brilliant. It's endlessly fun and as you say, energizing. So
the answer is we're done. We're doing it.
Doing it. Done deal. Let's sign on the
Sounds
dotted
like
line.
it. Yeah.
So call my agent.
Yeah.
You speak to your people. I'll speak.
Don't have a phone number.
Oh, is that actually Siri?
Yeah, no, that was a joke, Siri. You should know me by now, for goodness sake.
I love that. You actually just told Siri to call your agent.
Yeah, she was doing it.
Yeah.
That would have been a fun conversation in the middle of an event.
Well, hopefully that is something we can see.
That's the last time I used that joke.
Pippa. Hello?
Gosh, I'm in bed. What are you doing?
I want to write a new novel.
Yeah, can you draft up contracts? Me and Anna are co-writing something. Excellent.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions, Jackie?
Well, I think we probably do, but I think we're maybe running
done.
a little bit out of time. Don't want to keep, like you said, you probably need to be getting off to bed, or
honestly, if you let Josh and I talk, we'll be here till about 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's been great, and I've had lots of people say how great it's been. Great to hear you all chatting, and great to have lots of people involved. So really, really thankful for you joining, and something a little bit different for our group, which is great.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, hopefully we get a chance to chat again.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
and thank you so much, everybody, for your questions and for coming.
Yeah, thanks,
you.
everybody.
Thanks, Anna. Thank you.
Thank
so
you,
much.
Josh.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.